I first heard about her the way most people do now, not from a creaking staircase or a candle that went out in some ancient corridor, but from a photograph, a single image, grainy and impossible. The kind of picture you stare at too long because your mind keeps trying to solve it. A figure descending a staircase, draped in something that looks like mist and fabric at the same time. Her shape unmistakably human and yet completely wrong, as if the camera had captured not a person but the idea of a person lingering after death. They called her the Brown Lady of Raynham, and for years the story sat in mind like an unfinished sentence, a legend pinned to one place, an old English estate, a haunted hall, a ghost bound to a single set of stairs. That was the safe version of the story, the version that stays in books and late night documentaries, neatly contained behind the walls of Raynham Hall. The version where the haunting belongs to history, to another country, to another century. But the first time I truly felt her presence, it wasn't in England. It wasn't even near anything old or grand. It was here, across the ocean, in a place with fluorescent lights and asphalt parking lots and the ordinary hum of American life. And that's when I began to understand something unsettling. Some stories don't stay where they're supposed to, some ghosts don't either. It started with a conversation that should have meant nothing. A friend of mine, someone practical, someone who didn't waste time on superstition, mentioned her name casually over coffee, as if talking about weather. He'd been working a temporary job, cataloging archival materials for a private collection, sorting through old prints and letters purchased at auction. Most of it was dull, estate inventories, family correspondence, forgotten photographs of strangers in formal poses. But one afternoon, he found an envelope with no label, only a brittle photograph inside. He described it before he even showed it to me. A staircase, dimly lit, and something pale drifting downward like smoke shaped into a woman. He laughed when he said it, but his eyes didn't match the sound. He told me the collector had muttered one phrase under his breath when he saw it. The brown lady doesn't like to be moved. I remembered the way the air seemed to change when he said that, as if the room itself leaned closer. I asked where the photograph came from, expecting some obvious explanation, an old trick, a known hoax, a reproduction of the famous Raynham image, but he shook his head slowly. This wasn't the famous picture, this was something else. Similar, yes, but not identical. The same descending shape, the same veil-like blur, but the staircase was different, narrower, the walls plainer, and the strangest part was that the back of the photograph was stamped with the location. Not Norfolk, England, but Massachusetts. That was the first crack in the story, the first wrong detail that made my skin prickle, because legends like this are supposed to be anchored. They belong to one house, one tragedy, one grave. They don't cross oceans. They don't appear in places they've never been. Yet here was an image that suggested otherwise, an echo of the brown lady captured in an American setting, as if the haunting had stretched its limbs across continents. I tried to dismiss it. I told myself it was coincidence, a staged imitation, someone playing with folklore, but later that night, curiosity kept pulling at me like a hand at the sleeve. I went home and searched through archives, old paranormal forums, forgotten newspaper clippings. I expected dead ends. Instead, I found whispers, accounts scattered across multiple states, always vague, always half-believed. A woman in brown seen at the edge of historic estates in Virginia, a drifting figure photographed near an old staircase in Rhode Island, a hotel in New Orleans where staff refused to climb the back steps alone after midnight. The descriptions varied, but the feeling was consistent. A presence wrapped in sorrow and silence, appearing where she should not be, like a stain spreading through the fabric of old places. and then I found a detail that made my stomach tighten. One witness, decades ago, had written a line that stayed with me long after I closed the page. She isn't haunting the house. The house is only where she was noticed first. I sat back from my screen, the room dark except for the pale glow of the monitor. Outside, the world was ordinary. Cars passing, distant street lights, the comfort of modern life. But inside, something cold had settled in my thoughts. The idea that a ghost could be unmoored, not tied to one location but carried by attention itself, by photographs and stories and names spoken aloud. That night I dreamed of stairs I'd never seen, endless steps descending into fog, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of old perfume. I remember standing at the top, unable to move, while somewhere below something began to rise, not quickly, not violently, just inevitably, as if it had all the time in the world. When I woke, my sheets were damp with sweat, and the first thing I noticed was the silence, the kind of silence that feels watched. I told myself it was nothing, just a dream, just a story. But later that morning, as I passed the stairwell in my own apartment building, I paused without knowing why. The light above flickered softly. The concrete steps led downward into shadow, and for a brief, irrational moment, I had the unmistakable sensation that someone was already there, halfway down, waiting, not haunting Raynham Hall, not confined to England, but closer, already spreading. I didn't tell anyone about the stairwell, not at first. It felt too small, too stupid, the kind of moment you'd laugh at yourself for even mentioning. A flickering bulb, a shadowed landing, a half second of nerves left over from a nightmare. That's all it was supposed to be. But the problem with stories like hers is that once they get under your skin, they start rewriting ordinary things. Stairs stop being stairs. Hallways stop being empty. Silence stops being neutral. It becomes charged, as if the air itself is holding something back. For the next few days, I kept thinking about photograph my friend had shown me, not the famous Raynham image everyone knows, but the American one. The wrong staircase, the wrong stamp on the back, Massachusetts. I asked him again where it had come from, and this time his answer was less casual. He told me the collector had purchased a box of materials from an estate sale outside Boston, the kind of forgotten attic treasure people sell without understanding what they're handing off. Inside were letters, brittle and yellowed, written in careful script, addressed to someone with an English surname, and among them, tucked between pages like a pressed flower, was that photograph. He hadn't read all the letters. Most were personal, tedious, full of names and dates that meant nothing, but one line had stood out, written as if the person's hand had begun to shake midway through the sentence. She followed us. The veil is not left behind. Followed us. That phrase clung to me because it implied movement, not a hunting bound to one place, but a presence capable of traveling, crossing thresholds, slipping into new walls as easily as smoke. I went deeper into research after that, the way you do when curiosity starts to feel like compulsion. I found the familiar history first. Lady Dorothy Walpole, the supposed inspiration behind the Brown Lady, trapped in a miserable marriage dead young, her grief fossilized into legend. Raynham Hall's grand staircase, the site of sightings for centuries. Then the famous photograph, taken in the 1930s, the one that turned folklore into something people could point at and argue over. But the American spread, that was harder. It wasn't in neat timelines. It was scattered, messy, like someone had tried to erase the trail. The earliest mention I found wasn't even paranormal. It was a local newspaper clipping from the late 1800s, about a visiting English family staying in a colonial mansion in Connecticut. The article was mostly fluff, high society gossip, imported accents, the novelty of foreign nobility, but at the bottom, almost as an afterthought, was a strange note. Staff report discomfort near the main staircase after sundown. A lady in brown has been mistaken for a guest more than once. A lady in brown, no name, no explanation, just that. Then there were the hotel records in New Orleans. I didn't find them in official archives, but in a forum post written by someone who claimed their grandmother had worked night shifts in the French Quarter. She'd refused, always, to take the back stairs alone. She said the air there smelled like old lavender and dust, and sometimes, halfway down, she'd see fabric moving where no one stood. The poster wrote it off as superstition until years later, when they saw the Raynham photograph for the first time and felt their stomach drop. And then there was Virginia, a plantation house turned museum, the kind of place where history is polished for tourists but never truly clean. A volunteer guide described seeing a woman descending the staircase upstairs after closing hours. She wore a dark gown, her face obscured by something like a veil. The guide called out, assuming it was a visitor who hadn't left. The woman didn't respond. She simply continued downward, soundless, her movement unnaturally smooth, like mist sliding along air. When the guide reached the bottom, the staircase was empty. The museum director later dismissed it as imagination, but quietly, new rules were put in place. No staff alone after dusk, stairwells locked, lights kept on overnight. The pattern was beginning to form. Always stairs, always old buildings, always that same drifting figure, half seen, half felt, and always the same sensation reported afterward, an oppressive sorrow, not angry, not violent, but heavy enough to crush the breath from your lungs. What unsettled me most was how people described her presence. They didn't say she attacked, they didn't say she screamed or rattled chains. They said she watched,